I cannot open my. Oh yeah, here we go. All right, that should work. Oh, it's warm. Sorry, just 1 second. It's not opening. I need a sec. Somehow. Okay, it's not working. Sorry, I cannot open my text without internet. I don't know why it doesn't. Yeah. Oh, I think that's working. Okay, now it's one is working. And yeah, that's a good idea. All right, just a sec. Yep, it's working now. Great. All right, let's start. With some delay. Okay, let's start with the prayers. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By accumulating merit and wisdom through generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By accumulating merit and wisdom through generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By accumulating merit and wisdom through generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and anger, that holds some close and others distant. I pay homage to the Sublime Mother of the victorious ones of the three times, the inexpressible, inconceivable, and indescribable perfection of wisdom, which is unborn, unceasing, and of the nature of space, and which is the object of realization of the self-knowing primordial wisdom. All right. I'm going to do a few things differently, I decided. No, it's not going to be that much of a change. But last time I got a message from Rika, and that was very helpful, what she said. She said, when following the class online, it's sometimes very difficult to understand when am I reading something, when am I explaining something. So that's possibly also the case when you're here. I don't know, because it's just too fast. Now I'll do it slower. I'm determined to make some changes, to read slower. And please don't hesitate to say so. It's not disrespectful. It's really helpful if you tell me to slow down or to shut up when it's necessary. No, I'm kidding. I mean, no. But no, just to let me know, because I really appreciate any feedback. And to just slow things down a little and to summarize. I used to do that. And I don't know, summary, it's kind of, I forgot about it. I haven't really summarized. So sometimes just to quickly say, okay, so this is what we've done today. I think that may be helpful just in terms of memory. Yeah, I'll try and remember that. But before we start, yes, please.
So the speech, it's not only the speed,
Not just the
sometimes you talk a lot about examples, and then you go out of the text.
Yeah.
But then you come back, and meanwhile, I think many people lose the page and the paragraph.
Yeah,
so
that's a good point.
This piece,
it's just being too scattered. Yeah, you're right. So, no, I mean, it's true.
To mention the page and the paragraph.
Yeah, you're right. That's a very good suggestion. So as Doris says, it's not just about the speed, it's also about going off into something else. And then to returning is difficult. It's true, yeah. Like, where did we get to? Which page number, which paragraph? So just to mention it, I think that's a good suggestion. Great, thank you. Thank you for that. There were a few things that came up last time, and I can't believe I got Taruna's question like so wrong. She asked a very important question. She asked about a Shravaka by tenet and by path. And I had the word Shravaka. I got that totally wrong. I was thinking Samkhya. Samkhya is a Buddhist school, non-Buddhist school, non-Buddhist Indian school. So I was wondering, why did she talk about Samkhyas by tenet and by path? I didn't even recognize the Buddhist terminology. And I gave her this odd answer. Now in retrospect, I'm thinking, oh, that must have, sounded so odd. I said, you don't have to talk about a Shravaka, you can talk about a Buddhist tenet or something to that effect. But the rest of the answer is the same. So it wasn't such a big deal. But yes, I said that if you realize emptiness, I don't think you'll miss it. If you're a Shravaka by tenet, okay, and then you become an Arhat, well, you need to become a Prasangika by tenet in the meantime, because as a Shravaka by tenet, it means basically you follow the Vaibhashika or Satantrika school, one of the two. But never mind. So let's assume, yes, you do realize emptiness then, based on the correct understanding, and I'm pretty sure you'd know. So my answer therefore remains the same. If you realize emptiness, I'm pretty sure you know. But it doesn't go the other way around. Just because you think you've realized emptiness doesn't mean you have. So that was Rika's point, right? It goes one way. You've realized emptiness. What you've realized is actual emptiness, and I think you know. But if you think you've realized emptiness, that doesn't necessarily mean you have. You see how there's a difference? So yeah, there are definitely quite a few people. I haven't really met them, but I'm pretty sure there are. Kind of bump into someone, I don't know, McLeodganj. And by the way, the other day, possible, right? Absolutely. Because, well, the word is difficult to understand. People mistake it with nothingness. And if nothing appears to the mind, oh, I just had an experience of emptiness. Who knows? I remember translating sometimes for lamas when people came to see them and said, I saw this bright light. Is that emptiness? And the lama kept a very straight face. Sorry, dear. Or no, they didn't necessarily say that. But yeah. Okay, there's that. And then there's something about the robot with the mind. Could the robot become ordained? I remember reading about that yes, it was somewhere, it appeared on my phone, that there was an AI, there was a robot that was ordained in Korea. But the thing is that I said that robot can't be a monk because it doesn't have, I should not even say that, it doesn't have renunciation. But there's more to it. Because also to be a monk or a nun, you must have sexual desire. You must have sexual desire. It sounds like counterproductive. Wouldn't it be nice if you didn't? But actually, you can only take the vow to refrain from any type of sexual activity if you actually have something to refrain from. Similarly, you only can take the vow to refrain from killing if you could actually have the wish to do so at some point. Out of strong anger, out of strong attachment, you could potentially kill someone. Therefore, a robot, I mean, they can be programmed to kill someone, certainly. Or I don't know, to engage in any kind of sexual behavior, that's possible, but it doesn't come out of a proper, what will be a proper kind of mind or mental factor having desire. Again, another reason for why a robot would not qualify, at least according to my understanding. And even though someone said they were really a monk, well, maybe out of skillful means to inspire others, if a robot can do it, you should, I don't know. I don't know why they said so, but according to my limited understanding, you need to have renunciation. That is the prerequisite for even taking the vow in the first place. And of course, the different levels of renunciation. But at least a kind of a basic level. For that, you need a mind. Secondly, you need to have, in the first place, the desire. You need to have a body that is capable of having sexual desire. Yeah, doesn't have to always be manifest, can lie dormant, but still have a body that functions in that way. Okay. Then that's something B brought up, and I didn't pay attention to it. But again, these discussions, I think they're really helpful to hear other people's views, look at it from the point of view of their understanding. So B said something, she said, maybe the point is not dissociating I from my mind, but not hold either as truly existent. I think that was in relation to the discussion we had last time. Teresa, oh no, she's there now. Teresa, last time you said there, yeah. So Teresa said last time, what is the conventional I? What is the I that does exist? And so in response to her question, I said, well, what did I say?
Maybe labeled on body and mind.
The I that is labeled on the basis of either body or mind, or both, for that matter. Now, for instance, I gave the example, you're meditating and you label I meditate. Oops, I meditate. So actually your mind is meditating. There's no separate I that also meditates, although it feels that way. And so B's point here is, well, it's not so much about disassociating or separating I and mind. It's about holding both as truly existent. But there's no contradiction, because I and you are merely labeled, right? I and you are merely labeled. You are I, and I'm you from your perspective. But because I perceive I to be truly existent and you truly existent, I create a distance that's not there. I create a dividing line. It's no longer merely labeled. There is now a truly existent distance. You see how so this is a huge problem, actually. The sense that I exist intrinsically as this I, that is more precious than everything else. And you exist intrinsically as you. And there's this distance, therefore your happiness is not as important. If I could see the closeness we all share, if I could really understand that, then I'd be a lot more concerned about others' welfare, about your welfare. You see the difference? Actually, because we perceive both I and others to be intrinsically existent, we create this distance that doesn't exist. And we try to reduce it by generating love and compassion. But actually, if we fully understand that that distance is merely labeled, it's just a matter of perspective, my mind's perspective or a vantage point, my vantage point versus your vantage point, then love would automatically flow. I mean, at least would arise much easier. So this bridge, we have to bridge this gap. We've created this gap, and that needs to be bridged, either through understanding that neither you nor I exist intrinsically, or through generating love and compassion which would be the natural consequence if we really understood how we relate to each other or what our relationship really is. But still, we kind of fake it. We generate love in that moment. You see what I'm saying? It would be the natural consequence. If I understood how we really existed, it would be very easy to have love. But right now, it's so difficult to love others. But by faking, faking sounds weird, but basically trying our best to generate this love, although it doesn't come natural, in that way, we use the IBD guest, but it's still blinking.
Showing the red light?
It's a red light, it's blinking. Thank you. Those are the ones from Agile. Oh, they're really fast. All right. So therefore, we use love and compassion to bridge that gap, basically. Okay. For the time being, that's fine. But in the long term, we need to understand how phenomena really exist. Okay. So therefore, dissociating I from mind is the same as holding I and my mind both as intrinsically existent, because again, I create that gap. So I'm over here, mind is over there, and the I takes on that different entity. Does that make sense? The I is merely labeled, but therefore it exists, is labeled as a valid phenomenon. My mind is merely labeled. It itself is also merely labeled on the basis of moments of experience, on the basis of the object that appears and so forth. I label mind. And mind is the basis for me labeling I, right? It's the basis. So the basis of designation, of course, doesn't exist intrinsically, neither my body nor my mind. But both the conventional body and the conventional body and conventional mind serve as the basis of designating I. Whenever the mind does something, I say I do it. Whenever my body does something, I say I do it. There is no separate I other than the one I labeled, and that's good enough for the I to exist. If it existed in any way beyond that, it couldn't exist. It couldn't function. Hard to believe, but that's the claim of the Prasangika school. And so therefore, this distance I perceive between I and my mind is because I perceive both to exist intrinsically. All right. Then she also said that she has heard that when we realize the impermanence of one phenomenon, we cannot turn our mind to another thing and realize its impermanence. The way it works with the realization of emptiness. Is this true? Pardon?
Conceptually.
Conceptually, just conceptually. We're not talking about directly realizing. I don't think so. I think if you realize subtle impermanence, here we're talking about realizing impermanence. If you realize that you've aged over 10 years, is that subtle impermanence? No, that's very coarse, right? Therefore, to understand impermanence, we need to understand subtle impermanence. What does that entail? What does that mean? Subtle, how subtle does it get?
So change moment by moment.
Moment by moment. And so, how long are these moments?
Infinitely.
The shortest possible, because like a day, you could say a day is a moment. Moment is just a measure of time, and you could say, but that would be too long. A day is already, so the shortest possible, moment by moment. They don't really specify, but they say like really short moments. So maybe second by second or even millisecond by second. So if you realize that you yourself change moment by moment by moment by moment, right? What does that mean? My body constantly changing, never the same. It looks similar, but similar implies not the same. You don't use the word for two things that are identical, they are similar. No, they're not similar. They are similar, sorry. It's still blinking. Still blinking. Come have a look. I hope it's the right blinking. Right. So there is.
Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, so therefore the subtle impermanence, if you realize that your mind is constantly changing, your body's constantly changing, there's nothing concrete to hold on to, right? That is therefore they say if you realize that, it's so much easier to also understand that there's no concrete I, there's no substantial body and so forth. It's easier. But I believe if you've done that, if you've understood that on the basis of one phenomenon, let's say a table, it's so much easier to take the next phenomenon and conceptually think about that. And then easier to understand that that is also impermanent. I think it gets easier, makes sense, doesn't it? The same is true for emptiness. When you realize the emptiness of yourself, for instance, it's so, oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Well done. Okay, great. So when you realize the emptiness of one phenomenon, it's so much easier to then, to then realize the emptiness of another phenomenon as well. And so here we're saying it's not spontaneous. It's not like you've realized the emptiness on the basis of yourself, you turn around and you automatically know, no, there's still some process of reasoning, some process of reflection, but it gets easier. So I don't know whether there's a different, why should it be impermanence is a slightly hidden phenomenon. It's not extremely hidden, which you can actually just fully understand when you're Buddha. That's the good thing. The stuff we have to understand, the stuff we have to realize is only slightly hidden. Yeah, so therefore, that's and those we can all realize. And once you realize that on the basis of one thing, it's much easier to realize it on the basis of something else. Okay, that was in response to B's question. Maud also talked about the robot again, but that's, yeah, she's totally right with what she said. You can see it in the discussion group. Yeah, you must have consciousness basically, and there must be an endless continuum of consciousness. You can't have a first moment. So like if they were to claim the robot has consciousness, well, which consciousness preceded that consciousness? She makes a very important point, actually. I do want to mention this. Because if you say, oh, we created a robot with consciousness, well, consciousness can only come from an earlier moment of consciousness. Just as a physical entity can only arise from an earlier moment of a physical entity. So to understand consciousness, consciousness is an experiencing entity. We label the experiencing entity that we experience right now. I mean, right now, you know, you hear something, you know, you see things, you're experiencing something. That is not your brain. That is based on your brain, absolutely, especially the sense perception, of course, is based on the brain and other organs. But the point is that that first moment of awareness must have been preceded by a former moment, and so forth, as an experiencing entity. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so that to claim, oh, there was a first moment, we created it in the lab or whatever, doesn't make any sense. Unless, as I said before, you create a robot one day, hypothetically, I don't even know if that's possible, but imagine you have that basis where a being is reborn into, and then, but that, where's the continuum of that? Well, that was the living being beforehand. So now they were reborn into that basis, which is now a robot, right? Yeah, I don't know in what universe that is possible, but who knows? Okay, so she made a good point here. And then someone called Lena is saying, once you realize impermanence of the self, all other phenomena are easy. Yeah, Might the self become easier? Yeah, possibly. I don't know. Yeah, on the basis of one thing, you realize the impermanence on the basis of one thing. It becomes easier to realize it on the basis of other phenomena. I don't know whether that's only true for the self. I think that's, but maybe because we very much hold on to a permanent I. Are you aware of your permanent I? Yes? Yes. You see, I think, yes, we do have that sense, oh, I never change and so forth. But there's another way in which we perceive or we apprehend, or at least it appears as if the self were permanent. Because if I were to ask you, the self that came into this classroom half an hour ago, or whenever you came into the classroom, is there a sense, kind of check that sense of self, is that the same self that's sitting there right now, is sitting here right now? What do you think? To just check, like, I'm not saying intellectually. Intellectually, of course, we know it's different. So I'm not asking, what do you think, as a Prasangika or a Buddhist tenet holder possibly? How does it feel? Or if it's too difficult, have you ever held a grudge? Held a grudge, nachtragend sein. If someone does something to you, let's say a few days ago, they're rude to you, they insult you, and you see that person and you feel, oh, that's the same guy. I'm just going to ignore him. Right? It shows you hold a grudge. You haven't forgiven what has happened. But there's a sense that's the same guy. So we're angry once again, we're resentful once again. We felt that way a few days ago, of course, when it just happened. But now we feel the same way because that's the same person. It's not, oh, there's the same continuum. They have changed, but it's the same. It doesn't feel that way, does it? It feels like that's the same guy. That's the one who insulted me. Which shows there's a sense the person 2 days ago and the person now are one. And if they're one, they haven't changed. Similarly, our sense, the I right now, and the I that came into this classroom, or the I that got up early in the got up this morning, same being, same person. Again, that shows you perceive of yourself as permanent. Yes.
So can these two phenomena be realized independent? Let's say a realization of emptiness and realization of impermanence, or actually they need to happen at the same time, because once you realize something, it's obvious the other one.
Okay, so your question is, are those two realized separately, or if you realize one, you realize the impermanence of a person, you right away realize the selflessness of a person? I don't think, they usually say, they recommend realizing the impermanence first, to focus on that because it's slightly easier. I don't think it's automatic, but I think it gets much easier. If you really fully understand that, you see, like ourselves right now, if our mind and body is constantly changing, and even the conventional I is constantly changing, that sense of a solid I will cease. I mean, how could it? What's that solid I that we hold on to, that solid owner? It becomes much easier, yes. Now, these are two things to really focus on: subtle impermanence and selflessness. Yeah. Okay. Yes, and then Maud, she responded to that. As you understand more easily emptiness, a little bit of getting familiar, it's easier to understand it with regard to yourself. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And then there's the thing about the sound again. The question about sound. I know so little about sound that I have a really hard time to answer this. He speaks about sound as like the frequencies, and that therefore like the mathematical frequency, and that therefore sound could be permanent. But actually this whole mathematical frequency thing, that's just a conceptual kind of description of sound. And then there's sound itself, That's a conceptual kind of way to look at things. Like just if you have like a mathematical way to look at something, that's different. That may be permanent, okay. We know the meaning generality of something can be permanent without the thing being permanent. I think it's different. Sound will nevertheless be impermanent, but I just don't understand it. Pardon?
The property maybe, like speed.
I mean, the property, yeah, so when you talk about a property, something that is impermanent can have a permanent property. For instance, the existence. Being existent, my own existence does not change moment by moment. My own existence, it's not like first moment of existence is slightly different from the, I mean, I just exist or I don't. Existence is a permanent property. Being an object of knowledge, that's a permanent property. Does that make sense? It's maybe a little bit unfamiliar with that way of thinking. But philosophically, my emptiness is definitely permanent. My lack of intrinsic existence, every moment, right? Every moment, there's its own emptiness, basically. So you could argue, well, every moment I'm different, therefore the emptiness is different. But the emptiness is only different because the basis is different. It's not a dynamic, fluctuating thing that kind of changes moment by moment. It's just an absence. It's just an absence of intrinsic existence. Therefore, it's not permanent. It's not impermanent. Existence, although it's not described as an absence as such, but it's definitely permanent. They say because there's something that exists and something that is permanent. So a common locus, something that is both permanent and existent, therefore existent must be permanent. But based on myself being impermanent, still it's said to be permanent. My existence is still permanent. It's not a fluctuating, ever-changing thing, nothing dynamic, but it's permanent. And still it's a property I can have. So the sound can have properties that are permanent, but that doesn't mean sound itself is permanent. Okay. So again, I'm sorry, unfortunately, I'm not able to say anything more about sound, because I know so little about it. About the end of the last lesson, being angry at oneself can also cause all sentient beings -1. Allez, Bernd is saying, remember I talked about how you can lose bodhicitta. How you can lose bodhicitta by focusing on all sentient beings and, So, meet this person and they're annoying me, I don't like them. And so I say, I want to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings, but not for that person. That would be -1. So now he says, how about generating self-hatred, generating annoyance with yourself, and you're like, I'm going to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings, but not for this one here. Would you lose your bodhicitta? Yeah, by definition, all sentient beings. I mean, Tibetans never talk about this because they don't talk about self-hatred as such. It's just not a concept they really have. I mean, they've been introduced to it, of course, by us from the West. I told many of you this story many times, the classic kind of story that, I don't know whether it's that classic, but like how His Holiness the Dalai Lama got together with scientists during one of the earlier Mind in Life conferences. And one of the speakers talked about self-hatred. And Geshe Thupten Jinpa was translating for His Holiness, and suddenly this discussion started. Like, basically, I suppose, what is self-hatred? What are they talking about? And so Geshe Thupten Jinpa explaining this concept of self-hatred, kind of reflecting Tibetan culture, where that is really not something that they, at least until recently, have not suffered from. Maybe, I mean, slowly, of course, Tibetans are also changing. But yeah, therefore, it's not discussed when you lose the wish to become enlightened for yourself, to lose bodhicitta. It never comes up. But of course, it makes sense, doesn't it? Interesting, yeah. Interesting point. What about the preceding consciousness of a clone? If you clone someone, Dolly, what was that? Wasn't that the first cloned living being, at least officially called Dolly? Where did that clone, what is the first moment of that consciousness? Well, later they said they cheated a little bit, didn't they? Not really sure there was like all that legit, but never mind. Let's say you have a clone. People are so worried about clones. I don't worry about clones. No way, even you have identical twins, right? I mean, at least at the time of conception, they have identical DNA. Are they exactly the same? No, they're not. In fact, now we know if the mind changes, the DNA changes as well. So I don't think we need to worry about thousands of cloned Hitlers or something. I don't think. Anyway, but what about the first moment of that clone? First moment of awareness in the continuum, in the body of a clone. Where did the first moment, what was the previous moment of that clone? The previous life. Maybe they died in a previous clone, but if not, they lived in a different. So I think clone is a good example. I mean, with the robot, it's a little bit far-fetched that you could be reborn into, but to be reborn in a clone, yeah, there was a basis. There was a karmic connection to the DNA of that particular being, no matter how it came into existence, and the person was reborn there. I mean, the babies that were created in petri dishes, that's not a clone. When you bring together the semen and the egg, I don't know the proper, I guess, ovum and semen. That was pretty unnatural in the sense that's but still living beings came into existence, and that's just another reincarnation. Now, this time you don't kind of create a body in that way, but just through the, is it not the female, the ovum? It's created by the ovum, or it's just a cell. I forget now how clones are created. But the point is, yeah, eventually you have a consciousness entering it. If there's a karmic connection, if there isn't, that particular ovum will just disappear. As it is true for just natural pregnancies. Sometimes there may be a fully fertilized ovum, and eventually it dies because there's no karmic force that allows for it to grow. Why does it grow? Stem cells. Why do the stem cells grow? Because there's also the karmic force of the being who's entered that particular living being. Yeah, stem cells are still there, but that they create kidneys and heart and so forth. Scientists have no explanation. Like, why do they do that? What makes them do that? They say the DNA, but how does it do that? So from a Buddhist point of view, well, there's the force of the karmic force of that being that makes the stem cells, grow in a particular way. But if there's no living being that entered that ovum, it will not be able to thrive. Therefore, you need both. But of course, you can prove one, you can't prove the other because it's extremely hidden. So, if an object is empty of inherent existence, how can it be permanent? It cannot. Oh. If an object is empty of inherent existence, how can it be permanent? I mean, does that mean it doesn't exist? Are they saying it doesn't exist? If it's empty of inherent existence, for instance, emptiness itself is just the lack of intrinsic existence. Does it exist? Yes. Is it impermanent? No, it's permanent. I don't see any contradiction. Emptiness itself, if emptiness didn't lack intrinsic existence, we'd have a problem. But of course we know it's all phenomena, right? Okay, anyway. Yes, please?
What you just said about the fetus growing, that it needs a mind stream, then why do plants grow? Because we say they're not sentient beings, but they also grow for some reason.
Yeah, so why do plants grow? This is like a whole discussion. I mean, from the point of view, the whole different discussion. So from the point of view of the Dharma, so Rika's point is, yes, if we say the body grows in a particular way, and that's the karmic force, what about plants? They also grow, and whose karma is that? Well, there's a whole discussion about that, with some people saying, well, don't trees and they're not sentient beings. In the text, it says they're not. But just because it says they're not, still needs to be taken with what do you call it, like a grain of salt, like grain of salt. Like you need to still check, is that a definitive teaching or a interpretative teaching? I don't really know. Because, the argument is like, well, a tree doesn't have feeling. But then if you put a nail into a tree, or it's, there's like maybe like a barbed wire, the tree grows around it. It may be a bit slower in its reaction to anything like what we would call pain, but still there is a reaction, isn't there? I've argued with a lot of people about this, Westerners in particular, and I'm like, they don't have feeling. And they're like, wait a minute, moving towards an object that is beneficial, moving towards the sun versus moving away from harm, bleeding, a tree's bleeding. So I don't know. And I remember reading a book by His Holiness, I forget what it's called. Gila actually gave it to me. And someone asked in the audience, asking whether trees are sentient beings or not, or whether plants are sentient beings or not. And His Holiness said, in general, they say they're not sentient beings, but about this plant in the corner of this room, I don't know. That was an interesting question. So he left the possibility open. So in other words, can a tree become enlightened? I don't know. Can you be reborn as a tree? I don't know. But let's say they're not. If they are, it's pretty easy. Well, the environment we find ourselves in. We talk about samsara, right? So what is samsara? First of all, how do you define samsara? We talk about samsara all the time. So please define samsara for me. Anyone?
Reincarnating over and over again.
Pardon?
Reincarnating over and over again.
But we say you're reincarnated in samsara, but you're not reincarnated into reincarnating again and again. So it needs to be something you can be reincarnated into.
In a place of suffering.
Pardon?
Suffering in a place of suffering.
A place of suffering. So it follows the Buddha is reborn in samsara. Take the subject, the Buddha. It follows the Buddha is reincarnated in samsara. Because he's reincarnated, he was born into a place where there's suffering.
No perversion.
There's no perversion. There is a perversion because that's the meaning of samsara.
That's not mine.
It's not established. Yes, Venerable Genselham.
It's contaminated rebirth without freedom or control.
It's a contaminated rebirth, but we say you're reborn in samsara. In Tibetan, it also says reborn in samsara. So to be saying you're reborn into a contaminated rebirth, that's not correct, right? What is actually samsara?
And peace.
The contaminated aggregates out of karma and afflicted emotions being reborn again and again.
Actually, strictly speaking, exactly as Venerable Kumbhila said. So actually the 5 aggregates, Ketubje says it very clearly in his commentary, in one of his commentaries on Pramanavartika, that the 5 aggregates are samsara, or the 5, not just the 5 aggregates, but the aggregates, as you said, that were created by karma and affliction. So you're reborn into 5 aggregates. Really, like it's your consciousness that takes on now the consciousness of a human being, and you have the body of a human being. Therefore, you're born into samsara. That is one way of looking at it. But then what about the environment? Because contaminated, Venerable Gyaltsen talks about it, and the environment we find ourselves in is contaminated, right? So is the Buddha's environment, when the Buddha comes to this world, is it contaminated or not? The answer is no. Just sharing the same place doesn't mean the place is contaminated. But for us it's contaminated, for the Buddha it's not. Now, the only option we're left with is that the environment I perceive is the contaminated environment. The one that I experience is the contaminated environment. The one that the Buddha perceives is not a contaminated environment. All right, so thus far I think we have to agree, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. There's a contradiction in one way or another. Either the Buddha sharing the same environment as we do, in that the Buddha can see us, but more importantly, we can see the Buddha, we can communicate with the Buddha. Therefore, one being contaminated, one being not. Can only be from the point of view of how we experience things. Now, bringing it back to the plants. It is also very clearly said that the environment we find ourselves in, we're not here alone, is the collective karma of everyone in here. Therefore, that would explain why there are mountains that look the way they look and so forth. So all of this is the result of our collective karma. Therefore, those who say that plants are not sentient would argue it's our karma that makes them grow in that particular way.
But couldn't then a fetus in a person's body also grow for several months without having consciousness enter? No.
That's true. She's saying if there were plants that grow in dependence on, if there are plants that grow in dependence on our karma and afflictions, wouldn't there also be a fetus that would grow in that way? Theoretically, you could say, yeah. But since it doesn't really happen, it's not like you have a fetus, then theoretically it could be born and you have a mindless fetus. But it hasn't happened so far, has it?
They grow steaks in a lab today.
Pardon?
They grow meat in a lab, they grow organs.
They grow meat in a lab.
They grow organs.
They grow organs. Oh yeah, maybe one day they're able to grow a whole pig, right? Maybe they're working on that. But is it possible? Yeah. Well then it's possible. You're right. You could have a human body if you can grow, I don't know, steak. I've heard you can, a particular type of meat. So they grow certain types of organs in a lab. They could probably grow an entire human being in a lab. And then it would be possible. Oh my God, I don't know.
Sorry, with regard to plants.
Yes, plants.
It's subtle. The tantric texts explain that it's subtle external winds that causes plants to draw up water and move them. This subtle external wind exists even inside mountains and rocks, which move over time. So they're alive in some tantric texts. It's called life force, but it's not live in the sense of consciousness.
In which tantric text? Do you know the names?
I don't know.
Okay,
I don't have the source, but this is what I've always understood.
Okay, so life force that exists in life force. I'm trying to think of the Tibetan word. Sok. Sok is not a word. Sok would not be, not sok, but sok. Sok is not something that you say a living being has, but that's a life force. You wouldn't say a plant has or a tree has. Yeah. So I don't know. Okay, so a life force. This is so subtle. I mean, it's so difficult to determine. Very difficult. I have no answer to. Yeah. So
because our very subtle wind and our very subtle mind.
Right.
Our very subtle wind is our actual body.
Our very subtle mind. A subtle wind is our actual subtlest body. Yes, exactly. Yes. So, and then in terms of that, having other beings, having other living existences, they also thrive on subtle winds, but then they have their own subtle winds, but no mind.
When people do meditation, just taking pills, the essence of
Okay, taking the essence.
of, can be a
Chulin.
stone, no? Apparently
Yeah.
the Chulin pills, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So what is that essence, right? I mean, of a stone. I mean, a plant, I understand is a stone.
Oh, that's a whole different question. That is more about Tibetan medicine, like taking the essential pills. Chulin. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, these discussions are great. Sorry for disrupting, because I'm quietly looking at the. Sorry. But these are important discussions, and it's sometimes helpful to just establish more than what we are discussing. I mean, like, what is samsara and so forth. But in the end, I don't know about.
Can I have a question to you? When you read this text about subtle force in nature, I call it nature, like rocks, plants, can you receive something of this with your awareness? When you're very open?
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that.
No?
But I just think it's important to distinguish between beings that have consciousness and beings that are alive and don't, like plants and so on, that clearly function and move, but they don't have consciousness. It's important to establish.
No, I mean
difference.
the sentient beings could receive something of the life force.
Yeah.
Could
They
you?
have consciousness.
I think this is also connected to Venerable Kunpen's answer. So Dora's question. So Dora's question was, if there's subtle energy in the trees and so forth, in rocks, etc., can you basically benefit from that? And so Venerable Gensel Hamo said she's not saying that. She's actually just saying you need to differentiate between subtle energy and mind. So plants don't have a mind. But Venerable Kunpen, I think, also asked about that. Like, maybe that subtle energy, that's what you're taking from when you take Julin, like the taking the essence pills, that you benefit from that subtle energy. I mean, that is definitely exists. And in the tantric text there, they clearly talk about there's energy in our body that interacts with the energy in the environment. And so, yeah, I mean, what is energy anyway? But I mean, there's certain energetic food that gives us nourishment and so forth in a different form than other food would do. Maybe in that way we also talk about energy. I don't know. I have no idea, unfortunately. Anyway, let's continue. Let's return to the text. Now, pay attention. Page 172, paragraph 3. No, I'm so glad that Doris pointed it out. We've discussed so far the sequence of realizing selflessness of person versus selflessness of phenomena. Two sequences were offered, but both are, well, for some, they realize the selflessness of phenomena first. Some realize the selflessness of person first. It is recommended to focus more on the selflessness of person, because the strongest attachment arises with regard to the self, and therefore it could be effective in just reducing that kind of self-attachment. But other than that, it depends on the person. Now, the second question here is, on page 172, paragraph 3, regarding the sequence of the mind grasping at the intrinsic existence of phenomena and the mind grasping at the intrinsic existence of persons, what comes first? What comes first? I mean, again, it's like a chicken and egg question, of course. But despite that, seed and sprout and seed, similar, right? But still we would say the more direct relationship between seed and sprout is first you have a seed and then that gives rise to a sprout. Similarly here, first you have either grasping at the intrinsic existence of phenomena first, and then from that grasping at the intrinsic existence of person arises, or the other way around. Well, according to Ayya Nagarjuna's, for instance, Precious Garland, there's a quote, and I'm pretty sure you've heard about that before. It's on page 173 in the very beginning. For as long as there's grasping at the aggregates, for that long there's grasping at the I. That is usually interpreted to mean first there's grasping at phenomena, and then there's grasping at the I. But why? Why is that the case? So if I look at the, I'm reading now, I'm looking at the text now, I'll start reading. Regarding the sequence of the mind grasping at the intrinsic existence of phenomena and the mind grasping at the intrinsic existence of persons, it is commonly accepted that grasping at the intrinsic existence of phenomena precedes grasping at the intrinsic existence of persons. This is because, why? For those of you who haven't looked into the text, why do you think that is true? Yes. Oh, okay. Go ahead, Tommy. You haven't said anything today.
Maybe because like what you perceive like with your sense consciousnesses is aggregates, and then you perceive of the aggregates, and then you perceive them as truly established. And then once you have a truly established aggregate, then you have to have also a truly established person.
Yeah, that's exactly
like a basis for it.
That's exactly it. So just as he said, well, first you have it, you perceive, in order to perceive a person, you need to perceive their aggregates. If I see someone over there, on the side of the road, I see their body first. And that appears to me as intrinsically existent, and it's possible to then generate the sense that person exists, that body exists intrinsically, and only then do you perceive the person. So I'll just read it. So exactly as Tomer said, this is because in order to take a person to mind, we must first take to mind one of their aggregates. That aggregate appears to exist objectively and may subsequently be grasped at in that way, perceiving that to exist objectively or intrinsically. Only a moment later do we conceive of the person in dependence upon the aggregate, and possibly grasp at their objective or intrinsic existence. Does that make sense? So first, if you think of someone, you think of their face, for instance. You see their face or you see their body. What's also interesting, if I ask you to describe a person, if the person existed intrinsically, you should be able to describe this person without referring to anything but the person.
Not body, not mind.
Not body, not mind. Can't do that. That's another reason for why they say the person is just labeled. Because the moment you want to say something about the person, you have to refer to their body or their mind. If the person existed intrinsically, you could talk about the person without having to refer to their body or mind.
Why?
Well, because you see, it's merely labeled on the basis of body or mind. So we have to go, if you want to talk about the person, you have to talk about that on which you've labeled the person. For instance, when you talk about this building here, we label building on the basis of its parts. Now, if you want to talk about the building, describe the building, all you can describe are the parts because it's merely labeled on the basis of the parts.
But what's wrong about it?
There's nothing wrong about it. It's just another proof for the fact that this building, for instance, is merely labeled. Because if it weren't merely labeled, you could talk about the building. You wouldn't have to depend on something that is not the building, namely its parts. Does that make sense? Think about it. If it existed intrinsically, if anything existed intrinsically, you didn't have to depend on something other than the thing itself to talk about it or to take it to mind. Right? The only thing you would take to mind is that thing itself, because it's not just labeled on the basis of its parts.
But isn't it like the lower tenets would say that like the actual person is the mind?
The lower tenets, yes, the lower tenets, they would say, that's absolutely right, the mental continuum, that is the person. But they distinguish between a substantial person and an imputed person.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, they have two people.
When you think about a person, you think about an imputed person.
Yes,
On the basis of a substantial person. So like
they say you find,
tenet,
yeah,
like
they say you find something. I mean, it's this whole issue about what do you find? What, like when you engage in ultimate analysis, where's the person? What do you find? The Pralingika school says you don't find anything. There's no essence. But the lower schools say, yeah, at least you find the subtle, sorry, not the subtle, the mental continuum, the mental consciousness. Yes, you do. But
then you can talk about the person.
But then you have the same problem.
Yes.
Try to talk about that mental consciousness without talking about something that is other than that. Right? You have the same problem. Yeah. So the Svatantrika, they're trying to find a way around it. The Svatantrika, I don't know whether you're familiar with that. When they talk about a person, it'll come up here as well. When you talk about a person, they say, if you search for the person, you'll find something, some essence. The Prasangika school would say you don't find anything. But they say you find the mental consciousness. You find that, and that is the essence of the person. There's something under ultimate analysis, you find that. And of course, we will all agree that of the different aggregates we have, the mental continuum is the most important. It's the most important. Because, well, first of all, it's the one that always continues. It's the one that's always there. And it's the one we can transform. By transforming that, we also transform the sense consciousnesses. But basically, directly, we transform the mental consciousness. And anything we say about a person, about their character, it's always the mental consciousness. I mean, when you talk about the character of a person, you don't say they can see well. We wouldn't say that's that character, or they're tall. It's not part of that character. So what is the essence of a person? It's always related to their mental consciousness. They're kind, they're generous, they're angry, and so forth. Therefore, it makes sense that in the lower schools that cannot accept the Prasangika tenet, that nothing can be found, because for them that means the self can't exist. They have to posit something, and they posited the most important aggregate. Well done, right? But they end up having the same. Then they have the problem with their cup. There's no mental consciousness that you can posit as the essence of the cup. What are you going to posit? What do you find? What is that essence when you take apart the cup to find the cupness, to find this essence that makes this a cup versus this being tissue paper, right? Tissues, right? What's the difference? The material. But in the end, when you take it apart, you have the same atoms, right? So anyway, all right. So this is because in order to take a person to mind, we must first take to mind one of the aggregates. That aggregate appears to exist objectively. Sorry, I'm back in the text. Forgot to say that. 172, still paragraph number 3. This is because in order to take a person to mind, we must first take to mind one of their aggregates. Okay, I read that part. Now, the next paragraph, sorry. For example, when we see someone approaching us, our eye consciousness first apprehends a visible form such as their face. Okay, see first the face. Usually it's the face by which we identify someone. We look at people's faces. If we were looking at people's elbows, then we would be able to identify them. Okay, who are you? You would be able to identify them by their elbows. But yes, we look into their eyes, and so therefore we see their face. That face appears to exist from its own side. On the basis of that appearance, the mind then identifies the person and thinks, there's Tashi, there's Mary, or there's my friend. In this sequence, the aggregate is taken to mind before the person designated independence upon it. I guess you can say that's always true. Before you can take to mind a certain thing, what appears to you first is a part of that. Isn't that right? I mean, when I talk about, before I can think about the table, I see a part of this table. What appears to my mind is not the entire table. It's only the front, or from your perspective, the back of the table. From my perspective, it's the front of the table. I only perceive that. Through the appearance of that, I can then think about the table. Therefore, in the same way, a part of it appears first before the entire table appears to my mind. Okay. The same is true when thinking about ourselves. Oh no, sorry, here. In this sequence, the aggregate, consequently, the grasping at the intrinsic existence of the aggregate precedes the grasping at the intrinsic existence of the person. The same is true when thinking about ourselves. That's the last paragraph of 172. We usually first take to mind either our body or mind. In our own personal case, we can take to mind the mind. We can think about our own mind. There is a saying, our own mind is not hidden to us, which actually, it's not true, I know. But I think what it means is potentially it's not. If we're mindful enough, then it cannot be. I mean, because we're so distracted. Actually, the sound outside, is that hidden to us? No, but we pay attention to something else. Is that right? Outside, the noise, we don't always pay attention to it. We're busy with something else. And then our awareness becomes what is described as an awareness to which the object appears, but it's not ascertained. Or an inattentive awareness, if you like. A non-ascertaining awareness. So does that mean it's hidden? No, it's not a hidden phenomenon. It's just that we don't pay enough attention to it. I think similarly, if we generated a very strong introspection, very strong mindfulness, we would be able to perceive every mind. Potentially we could, but we can't do that with another person unless we develop a type of clairvoyance. A clairvoyance. I don't know, we study about the clairvoyances as part of our studies. And for that, you must develop first a union of calm abiding and special insight. So very deep levels of concentration before you can actually know another person's mind. And then, of course, it's possible. But here in the case of ourselves, we usually first take to mind either our body or mind. So going back to the text, last paragraph 172. For example, we may think my body's tired or I'm angry. In those cases, then, the body or mind is taken to mind first, and the thought I arises in dependence upon it. Accordingly, the grasping at the intrinsic existence of the aggregate precedes the grasping at the intrinsic existence of the person. And there's the quote from Arya Nagarjuna's Precious Garland. For as long as there's grasping at the aggregates, for that long there's grasping at the I. All right. So now we go back to Lama Tsongkhapa's text. The meaning of these points presented above, and above here, of course, we're talking about the three types of reasoning we have been going through. So the meaning of these points presented above seems especially difficult to comprehend. Even those who typically rely on this tradition of Chandrakirti and Shantideva's works appear to have struggled to explain them well. So to critically examine this issue of whether Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas possess the realization of emptiness, I will present here how the doubt arises in the first place and how to resolve it. That's what Lama Tsongkhapa says. Okay, that's on page 173. And then to explain this passage, at this point, the discussion turns to a more detailed analysis. Well, it seems very detailed before already, but no, it's a different type of analysis here. Taking up a subtle objection in response to the preceding explanation. So it's a subtle objection in that even some scholars who follow Acharya Chandrakirti still disagree that you have to realize emptiness in order to become liberated. That was apparently quite strong. So Lama Tsongkhapa notes from the outset that the issue at hand, what is that issue? Whether hearers and solitary realizers must realize emptiness in order to attain self-liberation, is especially difficult. That's why we discussed it that much. It was historically very difficult. And the commentaries reflect that. Not everyone clearly explained that you have to realize emptiness in order to become self-liberated. Even scholars who otherwise rely on both Acharya Chandrakirti's and the great Bodhisattva Shantideva's works within the Prasangika tradition have found it challenging to explain clearly and hold the view that it is sufficient to realize the absence of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self. So there are some who say it's sufficient to just realize that core selflessness. And these scholars, they're also given by name here, Chaba Chögyal Sengye and Buddha Tamche Khenpa. Those were Tibetans, great Tibetan masters of the past. But that's what some commentators would say, that those were the two Lama Tsongkhapa here is referring to, that they still held the view that you don't have to realize emptiness. Okay. Accordingly, so going back to this, accordingly, the following discussion unfolds in a dialectical manner. It first articulates the rationale for doubt as to whether realizing emptiness is necessary for liberation, and then resolves that doubt. Okay, so first, here someone asks a question, says to Lama Tsongkhapa, it is certainly the case, this is again Lama Tsongkhapa here, the last paragraph of page 173. It is certainly the case that one can and does establish, by means of a valid cognition, the 16 characteristics of the Four Noble Truths. So someone is saying you only need to realize the Four Noble Truths really well in the form of these 16 aspects, such as impermanence and selflessness. The latter here understood in terms of the absence of a substantially existent self-sufficient person that is neither identical with nor separate from the aggregates. When this happens, it will also emerge that the principal trainees of such a path will come to cultivate great familiarity with such understanding of selflessness. So they constantly say, it's just that, you only need to realize that, and then you become familiar with that. And if this can happen, then a direct realization of the selflessness of persons can be established through the reasoning that proves how yogic direct perception is possible. So in the Pramanavartika, the text on logic and epistemology by Acharya Dharmakirti, he very clearly says it's possible to generate a yogic direct perception. It's possible through familiarity. Through familiarity, any mind can actually transform. If it's first conceptual, it can transform into a direct perception, except if it's a wrong consciousness. I don't think it's possible. It has to have some root in samsara. I don't think, but yeah, never mind. I'm not going to go into that discussion. So anyway, yeah, never mind. So therefore, any mind, let's say any correct mind, if you focus on it long enough, it can turn into a direct perception, a mental consciousness that directly perceives it. I mean, you could do that with a table. If you focus on the table long enough, it could turn your conceptual mind, without seeing the table, could turn into a direct experience of the table. But why would you do that? It takes so much time and effort. I mean, there's no purpose of doing that. But here the argument is based on what Acharya Dharmakirti teaches us. Our mind has the capacity to focus on something conceptually, and if you focus on it long enough, then that conceptual aspect of the mind, it falls away. In other words, the mind transforms into a direct perception. You directly experience the object as if it was in front of you. That is the ability of our own mind. But we have no experience of that right now. Unless you've done that before, I don't know, but yeah, it's very difficult. But that's his argument here. He's saying you can realize this core selflessness directly. If so, and of course Lama Tsongkhapa doesn't disagree, but this is someone explaining their view why it is possible to become liberated just in dependence on realizing this core selflessness. If so, will then follow that such a path of seeing, realizing such core selflessness basically, can eliminate the acquired afflictions. So, can eliminate first the acquired level, and when this is established, then the path of meditation, wherein the selflessness of persons that has already been directly seen before during the path of seeing, is made familiar, becomes established as well. So once you become familiarized with this core selflessness, experiencing it directly, then you move on to the path of meditation. This means then that such a path can eliminate even the innate afflictions, thus establishing the possibility of the cessation of all contaminant afflictions. In that case, it would follow that even without realizing emptiness, one can eliminate all the afflictions of the 3 realms together with their seeds. But they're not really explaining it, they're just insisting you can go through all these levels that take you to liberation without realizing emptiness. Now, they're not really giving a reason for that. But anyway, that's what Lama Tsongkhapa says, or he's quoting this other person. So one can eliminate all the afflictions together with their seeds. This would be so because the elimination affected by means of the 2 paths, the path of seeing and the path of meditation, would have taken place in the manner of as described above, eliminating afflictions through supramundane path. Therefore, even with a path contemplating the 16 characteristics such as impermanence, all the afflictions can be eliminated. Okay, now this is, that view of a certain person. Following possibly Acharya Chandrakirti, but still insisting the 16 aspects. So what are the 16 aspects? Since they're discussed in some detail here, usually they're presented to us in class, and I've done this now. They may be helpful. This Homeless talks about it again and again, mentions the Four Noble Truths. When the Four Noble Truths are taught in the Tibetan tradition, they're usually taught, if they're taught extensively, with the 16 aspects. So that's why I mentioned them here. It's very, very helpful to know because, what is the framework of all of the Buddhist teachings? The Four Noble Truths. Therefore, it makes sense to know them. Anyway, so this passage formulates the core objection that gives rise to the doubt under discussion. That's what they claim. You have to just realize core selflessness. And then the person who described how to do that, they went through all the levels and stages of the path, but of course, without mentioning emptiness. It presents a line of reasoning that is internally consistent with the standard Buddhist path of theory and directly challenges the claim that the realization of emptiness is necessary for liberation from samsara. This is fascinating because actually there were we hear Acharya Chandrakirti talks about it all the time. We feel like, oh my God, this is so much part of the Tibetan texts or Buddhist texts in general, but it isn't. Most of the texts don't talk about this. On philosophy, for instance. Remember, I spoke about the studies we do, the sutric studies we do. There are 5 main topics, which is just another way of saying you study 5 main texts. In fact, in Tibetan, it says Shungjin Kabunga, which is really just saying we study the 5 volumes of text, the great 5 volumes. And only one of these volumes says you have to realize emptiness to become liberated. All the other ones are from the point of view of other tenet schools, which all insist that you don't have to realize emptiness, you don't have to realize, forget about lack of intrinsic existence. Even the emptiness that some of the other schools accept, you don't have to realize that either. You see the difference? So they don't accept emptiness, first of all. They don't accept the lack of intrinsic existence, the actual emptiness identified in the Prasangika school. But on top of that, they say the emptiness that they identify, you don't have to realize that either, making it pretty simple, which is why it's important to put more emphasis on this and realize, emptiness is most important. What follows? So the force of the objection lies in the assertion that the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths are sufficient on their own to generate the supramundane path of seeing, path of meditation, that eliminate the afflictions and their seeds. So what follows is first of all a brief explanation of the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, outlining the basis of this objection. What are these? So first they're all listed. I don't need to read them, but they're basically, each truth has 4 aspects, 4 characteristics that help us to fully understand them. Okay, so the first one has 4, the second, the truth of origin, has 4, then the next one, 4, 4. So 4 times 4, 16. I'm not going to read through them because we read through them anyway, but I've listed them here. The understanding of each of the 16 aspects counteracts specific wrong views with respect to the Four Noble Truths. So the Four Noble Truths, usually we know the Four Noble Truths, I'm pretty sure most of you know them, but this is kind of like looking at them in a slightly different way, in the sense that there's certain wrong views that we hold that prevent us from fully understanding these Four Noble Truths, these 4 truths, and therefore it's important to understand the wrong views and the views that counteract these misconceptions. Therefore, it says the understanding of each of the 16 aspects counteracts specific wrong views with respect to the Four Noble Truths, both innate misconceptions as well as acquired views. Some of them are upheld by non-Buddhist Indian schools. But even though they were upheld by non-Buddhist Indian schools, they relate to us in some way or another. I mean, it's not surprising that they have this view, because it's just human, basically, to hold some of the views. And again, we may hold some of these views ourselves without being conscious of them, and therefore it's good to look at them and fully understand each of the 4 truths. Okay? Taken collectively, the 16 aspects are presented as systematically dismantling the principal mistaken conceptions that sustain cyclic existence. So basically our wrong views that sustain cyclic existence are all contained in these 16 aspects. But what's important is there is a coarse version of the 16 aspects and there's a subtle version. Here, first you get the coarse version and then the subtle one. And the only difference is selflessness. The coarse selflessness that's presented in the coarse version and the subtle selflessness that's presented in the subtle version. But other than that, they're the same. Okay, so first, wrong views counteracted by understanding the 4 aspects of the truth of suffering. Impermanent is the first of these 4 aspects. True sufferings, or the truth of suffering. I think true sufferings is just a quicker way of saying the truth of suffering. But true sufferings, I guess it's an alternative. Such as the 5 contaminated aggregates. So the 5, here samsara, again, from the point of view of the 5 contaminated aggregates. So samsara is mainly the 5 contaminated aggregates. So they are true sufferings. They are impermanent, because they arise only temporarily and change from moment to moment. Understanding this counteracts the wrong view that they're everlasting and do not undergo momentary change. So we may have, of course, the intrinsic sense that they're permanent, and possibly an acquired sense, who knows, having philosophically the sense that they don't change. That's easy impermanent. Suffering, okay. So the contaminated aggregates are suffering in nature. They're not real suffering. It's not correct to say that the 5 aggregates are suffering. That's not correct. They're not suffering. Because suffering is the feeling of suffering, that unpleasant feeling that we have every now and then, but not all the time. And that is suffering, but it's not the same as saying in the nature of suffering, because our pleasant experiences, they're in the nature of suffering, but they're not suffering. We have, of the 5 aggregates, no surprise that feeling is mentioned separately, right? Feeling is mentioned separately for many different reasons. It gives rise to the 3 types of afflictions: attachment, anger, and ignorance. But on top of that, it also governs everything. It controls everything, doesn't it? Our feelings. It's all about feeling. Do you agree? Our whole life revolves around feelings. You feel hungry, It's an unpleasant feeling. The stronger it gets, the less likely you're able to sit here and listen. If you're in a lot of pain, suddenly you get this incredible pain in your head, you can no longer listen. Unpleasant pain, right? Unpleasant. If it's too pleasant, there's this blissful feeling suddenly. You probably also can't listen any longer. Oh, I just want to focus on that. So therefore, pleasant, unpleasant, our entire life really revolves around feelings. If it's too much neutral, we get bored. I want to feel something. Yeah. So people sometimes when they have, they're suffering from a bipolar disorder and they have to take certain medication, they don't like to take their medication because their feelings are more neutral, they're more neutral feelings, and so they're missing these pleasant feelings. So I want to have a pleasant feeling every now and then. If it's too much neutral, no, pleasant is important. Yeah, and then unpleasant ones, of course, we try to avoid at all costs. But you see, our entire life revolves around feelings. That's why it makes sense. We have to separate them. We have to talk about the 5 aggregates. We have feeling as part of the 5 aggregates, which needs to be mentioned separately because it's so important. So important. Okay. Therefore, even our feeling of happiness is in the nature of suffering. Okay, for many different reasons. One is to get it, we have to work really hard. It's impermanent. And if we don't do anything, into suffering. If we don't change the object, it will change into the classic example, right? If it gives you happiness to be with your friends, okay, just stay with your friend for the next year. I'll lock you into the same room. Before long, it'll turn into suffering. Anyway, so suffering. So the contaminated aggregates are suffering in nature because they're under the control of contaminated karma and afflictions such as craving. Understanding this counteracts the wrong view that they're pure and in the nature of happiness. We not only think they're in the nature of happiness. I mean, we look for nirvana in samsara all the time. Are you aware of that? If I could just do that, I'd be so happy. Right? We want things. We want certain things in life. I don't know, success, maybe fame, wealth. Certain things we want. We always want something. I mean, we're in the desire realm. Come on, that's the basis for our existence. But these things are all within in samsara, and we want them. We want them, and there's like this mind that really escapes our attention. That we want it, and we believe that will give us lasting happiness. I'm pretty sure if you've been in a situation you wanted to be with a particular person, you wanted to have a romantic relationship with them, and there was this almost intangible sense, if I was just with them, I would be happy. Right? If I could just get that pay raise, I'd be happy. If I could just if things would be, and it never happens. You get the pay raise, you get the guy or the girl or whatever, and still new problems arise because we're in samsara. What we are looking for, it's like, I don't know, finding an ocean in the desert. You can squeeze each grain of sand as long as you want. It's never gonna, or olive oil or whatever. I try to squeeze it out and try to get. That's what we're trying to do. We're literally, not literally, excuse me, not literally, but we're like someone in the desert trying to find, I don't know, get oil or whatever. Like impossible. The nature of sand is that it's dry and it's impossible. So likewise, the nature of samsara is suffering. To find lasting happiness, you're never going to find it. All this time and energy, if we could use it for realizing emptiness, we'd long have realized it. All the time and energy. We constantly keep on looking for, I mean, are you aware of your own mind? Always promising you, oh, if I had that, right? We're so, oh my God, they're suffering. Of course, it's in the nature of samsara. No surprise. I mean, you shouldn't be surprised, actually. Yeah, that's why we don't look in the right direction. Maybe there's still, I've forgotten one corner. If I just do that, maybe I find lasting happiness. Okay, anyway. But not just that, pure. We see the body as pure, as something desirable. In the other person, for instance, when we have attached, we're attached to our own body. We don't see it as something, fragile, yes, but in the nature of impurity. It's totally impure. Mm-hmm. It reflects our distorted mind. It's contaminated. I mean, stop taking a shower or using soap or both, or, and then other people, we have desire for the body of other people. And when Shantideva, he takes apart the body and he talks about all the disgusting bits, just remove the first layer and see how you feel. It's not about wanting us to, hate women, for instance, because, Shantideva, Acharya Shantideva, he talks to heterosexual monks, I don't know whether they all are heterosexual, but probably many of them were in the monastery he was in, so he was addressing them. And Nalanda, so he was addressing them. And so was Ayya Nagarjuna when he talked about to the king in the Precious Garland. I quoted him before. And again, he was a heterosexual king. In this case, I think you could say for sure, in terms of history, being with women, having desire for women. Ayya Nagarjuna knew him well enough to know that. So he's going to talk about the impure body of a woman. But that wasn't misogynist. It wasn't like, oh gosh, you need to hate women because they're so impure. If Ayya Nagarjuna had been a woman, and the person he was talking to was a woman, he would have said the same about the male body. Absolutely. Right, unless the person was gay. I mean, then it would be a different matter. But if they're heterosexual, then that's... So think about the way people see that body when they have attachment as pure. Right? Do you have attachment? When you're like, oh, it's so beautiful. Oh my God, it's so... And what's inside? Ooh, actually, in the column, stuff that's inside. I mean, just remove the first layer of the skin. There was an exhibition. There was this exhibition by someone who presented bodies only without the skin. Didn't that look disgusting? Pardon? It's called the Body World. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
It was German? It was not? That was only in Germany? Oh, it was just in Germany. Originally. Oh, it was also in... Pardon? Oh, it was in the Czech Republic as well. In Amsterdam. Okay, great. I see. So you're all familiar with that idea. I mean, is there a Mr. World that looks like that? Oh, it's gross. And it's skin deep. I mean, beauty is skin deep, and even that skin is full of stuff. I mean, it's like all these little, little organisms. They say there's so many little organisms in your eyebrows. I mean, I don't know whether there are more people in McLeodganj or more living beings in my eyebrow. I don't know, but it's so gross, right? And then you look at them, and they're so pretty, and they're all done, you spend a lot of money on making them look pretty, and you plug them and you paint them and you do whatever you do. And it's pure, it's in the nature of happiness. Oh my gosh, that is like trying to put makeup on a piece of poo, some poo, go to the bathroom and put some lipstick on it. I know I'm a little bit exaggerating, of course, it's not like that, but it's at least filled with that. So when it talks about pure, we look at this other body, our own body, we see it as pure. And again, it's more like an emotional kind of, it's not that pronounced that we're aware of it, but especially with the other person, right? That body, like we have attachment, it seems pure.
How would you describe a pure body? It would be much more difficult.
How would you describe a pure body? Oh, a Buddha's body.
Yes.
Just a Buddha's body. Right? I mean, that's really a pure body. But we don't need to go into the description of a Buddha's body here. I mean, at least you don't have to... like a Buddha's body, you don't have to wash. Never, ever. Have you ever wondered? I mean, we're so used to it. Wouldn't it be nice to have a body that you don't have to wash? It always smells good, right? It doesn't have to sleep. I mean, okay, it does get dark at night and we may feel like, oh, I want to bridge that darkness, but if we didn't have to sleep, if we were never tired, right now we feel like, oh, it's so nice to sleep, but only because we're tired. If we never felt tired, the stuff we could do, we could be meditating at night and do everything else during the day. We could get so much work done and so forth. So we didn't have to sleep, we didn't have to shower, we didn't have to eat. Okay, I guess we like to eat, but if we didn't feel hungry ever, I mean, the hours we spent shopping for food, well, first making the money to buy food, then shopping the food, then chopping it, and then cooking it, and then recovering from overeating. I mean, how much time goes to waste, right? Yes, Alan.
Are we not getting a little bit off topic?
Yes, we are getting off topic. Thank you. Thank you. That's what I want to hear. Very good. Thank you. You're absolutely right. But still something to reflect on. The purity and being in the body being pure and in the nature of happiness. Empty. Okay. So the next characteristic is empty. So the contaminated aggregates are empty because there's no self-sufficient, substantially existent self of a different nature that controls these aggregates. Okay. Understanding this counteracts the wrong view that there exists a permanent, partless, independent self. So there's no self-sufficient. So here it's kind of a weird way of saying this, but really it's talking about there is no permanent, partless, independent self. Most followers of non-Buddhist Indian philosophical systems, such as the Samkhyas, the Vaisheshikas, the Mimamsakas, and they're all really interesting. Their views are very interesting. The Mimamsakas saying, no, never mind, getting off topic. The Mimamsakas and others, now this is 176, the first paragraph. Again, I forgot to mention that. So most followers of these non-Buddhist schools engaged in extensive analysis and others, they engaged in extensive analysis and debate concerning the nature of the self. Even before the Buddha came, they were talking about what is the self? What is the self? Because most of these systems accepted past and future lives, they were especially concerned with identifying what continues from one life to the next. Yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it? And people have a hard time often when it comes to emptiness, about lack of intrinsic existence and so forth. What goes on from one life to the next? That's always a question that comes up. Recognizing the constantly changing nature of the five aggregates and understanding that neither the body nor typically the contents of consciousness, such as knowledge and understanding, are carried over to the next life, they concluded that only the self continues. Think, your body is left behind. The body, you don't take up your body. I mean, that's pretty obvious. But even the mind, everything we learned is forgotten when we die. The language you've learned, gone. Why? Why is that so? Does anyone know why? Yes, go ahead, Genzalam.
Because the gross mind dissolves into the subtle mind.
Exactly, because the gross mind dissolves into the subtler mind for good. And all our knowledge lies on the gross mind. The coarse or gross mind, that is the mind where we accumulated all this knowledge. When we fall asleep at night, our gross mind temporarily dissolves, but we wake up. In the case of death, the process of falling asleep is very similar, but this is the last time that on the basis of this body, our gross mind dissolves into the subtler mind, and then it's gone. The knowledge is gone. Therefore, they were aware that in India, in ancient India, before the time of the Buddha, and they wondered what carries over to the next life, and they concluded that only the self continues. What is that self? Not the conventional self, the way we talk about it in Buddhism. No, they therefore inferred is the wrong word. No, concluded. They therefore concluded, inferred is wrong. They therefore concluded that the self must be unchanging, because inferred, yeah, you can use it in everyday kind of language, but usually here inferred is used in the Buddhist context to refer something that exists. So therefore concluded is better. They therefore concluded that the self must be unchanging, yeah, has something that must continues, like must go on, that doesn't change. That neither body or mind could be its parts, because if body and mind were a part of the self, then if the self goes on, the parts have to go on, right? If I take my phone out of this room into a next room, I'm taking those parts of the phone with me. So therefore, you must have a self that is partless, in the sense that body and mind could not be a part of it. And what else would be a part of it? So body and mind cannot be a part of it, because then you take them with you to the next life. Because something that has parts, you can't shed the parts, right? I mean, how would you get rid of the parts of the phone but still have a phone? Impossible. Right? Impossible, exactly. Anatara, there she is. It's impossible to get rid of the parts of the phone or not get rid of the phone. Therefore, their theory was such that the self can exist totally separate from mind and body. The self is therefore partless. Kind of makes sense that they got to that conclusion, at least. So that neither body nor mind could be its parts, and that it must exist independently of the psychophysical aggregates. Because otherwise, how could you kind of separate mind and body, and the self goes on? Kind of like a soul that goes on. In order to account for continuity across lifetimes, they posited a self more stable than the fluctuating aggregates, one that is permanent, partless, and independent. It's pretty ingenious, right? I mean, it's not like they were not stupid. If you had enough time and you didn't know the Buddhist kind of view, I'm pretty sure there would be convincing argument I could put forward for the existence of such a permanent, partless, independent self. It makes a lot of sense. And they didn't just say it in a few words and they were done with it. They gave a lot of sophisticated explanation that is very convincing. And a lot of our views of our own self, they match that. Like the permanent self, something really there. And it goes as far, I spoke about this a few times in the past, like when you sometimes wish you were someone else. Maybe when you were younger, like as children, I spoke about this, that I wanted to be this girl. Okay, thank you. So I had that sense when I was at that age, I wanted to be that girl. I wanted to switch with her, right? I wanted to have her mind and body, and she would take mine. So that the sense that this is even possible shows that you have a sense there's such an independent I. As a result, many of these philosophers, and that was perfect for the Buddha, to have that kind of philosophy prevalent in India, in many different places. It was exactly the right time to say, okay, you understand the object of negation, at least on a coarser level. No permanent, partless, independent self. But already a lot of discussion and reflection on what the self is in the first place. As a result, many asserted the existence of a permanent, partless, independent self. Permanent in that it does not change, partless in that it lacks temporal and spatial divisions, and independent in that it exists separately from the aggregates. Because if it had any temporal and spatial divisions, well, temporal it would be impermanent, and spatial it could only be mind and body, and those are left behind. Right? What is a part of the self? It can only be physical or mental. But if it's none of these, then it can be partless. Have no parts whatsoever. So it's just it itself that goes on. This self is often compared to a pea inside a jar. You have a jar and you have a pea. You put it in the jar. That's like the self. When you're reborn, the self enters a body. That's like a vessel, like the jar. Pea in a jar. right? You have a pea in a jar. So our old director, he used to talk, again, he has in one of his books, he talks about the pendulum rising in one of his books, very nice book on the pendulum rising. And in there, he also speaks about, that kind of selflessness, and he compares it to a pea in a jar. So like yourself is thrown into an ovum, that's like a vessel, and that self remains with you, and then you die, and the pea enters another. That's how we look at it as well, don't we? To a certain degree, sometimes, like just myself kind of hops from one life to the next. Okay. Yeah, so pea in a jar.
But it is intellectually formed, isn't it?
Pardon?
It is intellectually formed.
That is totally acquired, as it's going to, I'm going to say that. But absolutely, as Venerable Jensen stresses, that is not an innate sense of a self. We don't have that innately because we do not feel that the self really can exist totally separate from mind and body. Innately, we usually don't feel that. So a permanent, yes. Maybe through more acquired kind of wrong views, we may have a sense that this is possible, but innately, we do have to differentiate between our innate sense of a self and an acquired sense of self. And so this would be an acquired view. Yeah. As a result, many asserted the existence of such a self. So this self is, this is going back to 176. That's the third paragraph from the top. With the jar representing the aggregates and the pea symbolizing the self residing within the aggregates until death, at which point the pea proceeds, or the self proceeds to another rebirth. Then the next paragraph on page 176, from a Buddhist perspective, such a self is untenable. If it really existed, and truly existed, if it really existed is better. If it really existed, sorry. If it really existed, it should be identifiable as something distinct from both body and mind. Moreover, a completely static self would be incapable. So if it were permanent, participating in experience or agency, as in like doing, functioning, having an object and so forth, which contradict our ordinary experience. For these reasons, Buddhist tenet holders assert the absence of a permanent partner's independent self. Understanding this absence constitutes the coarsest level of realizing selflessness. Right? That's empty. So there is no such a self. And then you have selfless.
Independent, distinct from body and mind, doesn't mean that different entities?
Yes. Independent here means that they're totally different entities. That, in other words, the body and mind could potentially exist without the self, which of course is impossible. But yeah, theoretically they could exist because they're totally separate. That's why you can leave behind your body and your mind. So it was probably that sense that your body, yes, obviously, and even the mind is kind of still lying over there, as if that was possible. Yeah. And then you have selfless, again, on the basis of true suffering, such as the contaminated aggregates. They are selfless because they're free from a substantially existent self-sufficient self that is one with these aggregates. Understanding this counteracts the wrong view that there exists a substantially existent self-sufficient I. But I might as well just go through this once more. So now on page 177, most non-Buddhist Indian philosophical systems also assert such a self. Okay. Now I won't feel bad if I go on until after 6 because it's starting to rain. That's going to be one of the first rains. We had one yesterday. We had one yesterday. Pardon?
Or manifest something like this, please.
No, that was not a thunder. That was in the house, yeah. Okay. Most non-Buddhist philosophical systems also assert such a self. the misapprehension of this type of I is subtler than the misapprehension of a permanent partner's independent self. Subtler in that it's more difficult to understand that it doesn't exist. Does that make sense? So permanent partner's independent is pretty absurd that such a self could exist, because, I mean, permanent, okay, but partners and independent, that really takes it to a different level altogether. But I mean, even nowadays, and I didn't even mention that, but nowadays there are so many ways in which we think of the self. If someone were to ask, in terms of Freud talking about the ego and the superego, then I've been told there's another one. Now you've got more than one. And I don't know how detailed the descriptions are in terms of going from one to the next. And so, I mean, I don't even talk about reincarnation, but I'm pretty sure, like in modern psychology, that there are certain theories nowadays. What is the ego? Because I do talk about the ego. And, you know, saying that it's very concrete, that it, I mean, people talk about the ego all the time. From a Buddhist point of view, it's just a mind that perceives something that doesn't exist. But in those cases, they talk about an actual entity. What is that ego? I mean, no one describes it in much detail, but that's an acquired view, isn't it? Yeah. Having said this, so the mind that apprehends a self-substantially existent self may or may not perceive it as entirely independent of the five aggregates. You could have the view that it exists totally separately, but you don't have to have that view. If you have the view it's totally separate, it's acquired. The crucial point, however, is that it conceives a self-sufficient I in the sense of a self to which mind and body belong. That's that sense of an I. Even if it's dependent on mind and body are dependent on it, but a sense of a self that is like an owner or controller that is truly distinct from them, like totally separate, like truly distinct from them, as in like not independently existent of them, but not just a label difference, but an actual difference here. Possessing, governing, and utilizing them while thinking mind. We think that all the time. We have that core sense of a self all the time, don't we? We don't always have the subtlest type of self-grasping, grasping at intrinsic existence. That is the basis, but we have that a lot of the time. Similarly, there's a sense that the self is substantially existent, which means that it can be identified or apprehended without having to identify or apprehend any of its parts, such as the aggregates. Actually, we would never agree to this. We would never say that's possible, of course not. But it feels that way. Oh, I could just kind of toss my aggregates to the side and look at the self itself. Feels that way, doesn't it? It feels so solid. You mustn't confuse the rational kind of intellectual mind versus our feeling of how I exist. Very separate. They're very, very different. I mean, and they're very different minds. And yeah, it's a little bit hard because usually when the more emotional mind or the deeper kind of mind, when that is active, we're not aware of it. We're usually not aware of it. Then there's the intellectual one. Yeah, that's a whole different matter. It can get everything completely right about the self and everything. But again, that's not what controls how we act. So the sense the self is separate and you could actually identify it separate from mind and body. Of the aggregates, there may even be a sense that one's own mind and body could be changed for another's, that the I could become the owner of another person's psychophysical aggregates. If I let you go now, you're just going to be caught in the rain. So,
Or go before it really starts.
Or you want to. No, go ahead if you want to go. If you live nearby, you're definitely going to make it. Maybe. You never know. Yes. Please. Yeah, we started a little later, so I'll add 5 minutes. That's okay. But for those of you who want to Go ahead. Yeah, please. Absolutely. No. It's just going to get worse. Judging from the color of those clouds, of the sky. Yeah.
So that sense of being able to exchange yourself with someone else, that's acquired.
That is totally quiet. So, like I said, you could hold, for instance, the first view that there's a permanent part, this independent self. So then, based on that, you still have the view that there's a self-sufficient, substantially existent I, and mixed with the first acquired view, a sense that, yeah, there's an owner that exists totally separate from mind and body. Will make sense, right? But when you have that view, it is acquired. So, on top of that, what's important is that they arise at different times. When the acquired view rises, it's based on our innate view. We have that innate view, there's an owner and so forth, but the innate view never gives us the impression or never perceives of a self that exists totally independent of mind and body. There's a sense they're connected. But when the acquired view is active in our continuum, then there is the sense, okay, possibly that the self could be exchanged for another person. So that's the acquired one. It doesn't have to be philosophically acquired. That's important also to understand. An acquired view is just a view we're not born with. That based on our innate view, we then come up with our own sense of what the self is. It could be a very individual view. It doesn't have to be influenced by modern psychology or, I don't know, Christianity when there's talk of a soul, for instance. It doesn't have to be influenced by them. I'm pretty sure when you were younger, do you remember when you were younger, when you had a sense of what the I is, when you thought about what is the self, who am I? Right? You had these thoughts. So maybe you came to some kind of conclusion about what the self is, findable or not. But this sense of an I, that's acquired. You were not born with that. I mean, you had the influence to have these thoughts, but when you come to the conclusion, yeah, the self exists like this and like that, I'll find it if I travel to Asia kind of self, well, that's acquired. Yeah. Okay, so from a Buddhist perspective, such a self-sufficient, substantially existent I or self, or as it's sometimes described, a substantially existent self in the sense of being self-sufficient. That's also the Tibetan expression sometimes. So in the sense of being self-sufficient is impossible because no such owner of the five aggregates, one that possesses, controls, and utilizes them can be found. And because it's impossible to apprehend I without apprehending any of its aggregates, nor is it possible to separate the self from its aggregates and transfer it to another, since a person's self is characterized by their mind and body. Therefore, Buddhist philosophers assert the absence of a self-sufficient, substantially existent I. All the Buddhist philosophers, all the Buddhist tenet holders agree, well, with one exception, one of the Vaibhashika schools, but never mind, Sammityas, they disagree. But all the other ones, I think they're called Sammitya. So all the other ones, they agree that not only is a permanent part, this independent self, totally impossible, but also a self-sufficient, substantially existent I, not possible. They all agree. So therefore, Buddhist philosophers assert the absence of such a self. Realizing this absence is considered more difficult than realizing the absence of a permanent part, this independent self. So this is to do with the aggregates. Those are the first four aspects of the first truth, the truth of suffering. So to fully understand the truth of suffering, and based on samsara, which is the five aggregates, that's the truth of suffering. The five aggregates, they're empty of being permanent. They're not permanent, in other words. They're not pure and in the nature of happiness. And they don't have a self. They're not ruled by a self that is permanent, part is independent, nor are they governed or ruled by a self that is self-sufficient, substantially existent. So if you really understand that, you understand the first truth. And actually, we may think, if there's like an announcement teaching on the Four Noble Truths, we're like, no, I know those. Actually, Every study of Buddhism is a study of the Four Noble Truths. Everything you study is actually understanding the Four Noble Truths better. That's the bedrock. That's the framework of all the teachings. They all relate to the Four Noble Truths, directly or indirectly. In fact, they're part of the Four Noble Truths. Yeah. And this understanding, as I said, and that's just the coarse Four Noble Truth. The subtle Four Noble Truth, you replace empty and selfless with the emptiness of phenomena and the emptiness of person. That's a subtle version of that. Yeah. But yeah, still part of the Four Noble Truth. Okay, that's enough. I didn't take any questions. Ooh, there's quite a few questions. Oh, okay. Oh. Sorry, I totally ignored because the discussion at the beginning was quite long. I got carried away. Alan, please.
Can I ask you something quickly?
Yes.
This that you mentioned before, that a conceptual mind can turn into a direct perception.
Yes. A conceptual mind.
Who said that? Tsongkhapa or somebody else?
No, that was well, here it's someone. Remember I said there are followers. So you're asking, I'll repeat the question. So the question was, it's someone is saying that conceptual mind can turn into a direct perception. Who's saying that? Lama Tsongkhapa or someone else? It's actually someone else who says you don't have to realize emptiness to become liberated. Realizing core selflessness is enough. And as everyone agrees, Lama Tsongkhapa and everyone else, when you focus on core selflessness for long enough, that mind can turn into direct perception, and then that eliminates the afflictions. Yeah. And Lama Tsongkhapa says, I agree that you focus on selflessness and that can turn into a direct perception, all that, but the selflessness is not your selflessness, it's much subtler, it's emptiness. Yeah. So the description they give, they're saying, look, you do this, so they say everything Acharya Chandrakirti would say, you have to realize emptiness first, then you realize it directly, you eliminate the afflictive obstructions, and then you eliminate the cognitive obstructions, and become enlightened. They say, yes, you do all that, but you don't need to realize emptiness. You realize core selflessness doing the same thing. Oh, no, sorry, you can't become enlightened with core selflessness. They wouldn't say that, but you can become liberated with core selflessness. So they describe the same procedure, except they say the object is not emptiness, it's selflessness. It's basically the 16 aspects. And of course, that's going to be, again, dealt with later on, Lama Tsongkhapa will, but that's the argument they basically present. Even followers, so-called followers of Acharya Chandrakirti, misunderstanding what Acharya Chandrakirti teaches. All right. Okay. We may actually make it without. So let's recite the prayers to dedicate all the positive potential we've accumulated. In the snow-encircled land, you are the source of benefit and bliss. Avalokiteshvara Tenzin Gyatso, please remain in life until samsara ends. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. May the precious view of emptiness, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Thank you very much.
If you know what time Solar is tomorrow?
I don't know. I only know he's.